Welcome to Max Minutes on this Friday, June 25th. We're thankful that you all are able to join us this morning with our friends with the Rework America Alliance. My name is Joy Wilkins, and I serve as the facilitator for Max, and I'm going to get us kicked off this morning on behalf of our Max Provider Council Chair, Dana Inman, who is joining us as well, but is just running into some tech issues, and so she's asked me to kick us off a little bit here. First and foremost, I want to go ahead and acknowledge our anchor investors for Max, without whom this work would not be possible. So that is WorkSource Georgia, the Georgia Department of Human Services, WorkSource Metro Atlanta, Atlanta CareerWise, Goodwill of North Georgia, Metro Atlanta Chamber, Bobby Dodd Institute, and First Step Staffing. So we are grateful to all of our anchors for supporting this work for Max, the work that we do through Max. Again, I'm kicking this off on behalf of Dana Inman, who's having some internet connectivity issues. We appreciate Dana and her leadership of the Max Provider Council. And I want to just give a shout out to Daniela Perry, who is our lead for our Max Minutes programming and has been really instrumental in arranging for today's program, along with Jenny Taylor at Goodwill of North Georgia, who has been a longtime partner with us and is also instrumentally involved in the Rework America Alliance with Joy Coates and her colleagues with the Markle Foundation, McKinsey & Company, Federal Reserve Bank, and so forth. Speaking of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, I'd like to go ahead and hand this off to Sarah Miller with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. She will be kicking off today's discussion that's going to be focusing on equity and inclusivity, and specifically why skills-based practices matter. So without further ado, Sarah, I'd like to go ahead and hand it to you.
Great, thanks, Joy, and good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. It's wonderful to be with you. So I'm Sarah Miller with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. I'm with the Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity. Many of you may know Stu Andresen and my colleague Catherine Townsend, also on the call with us today. And we've been close partners with Markle and McKinsey throughout this Rework America Alliance process. So we're very excited to be working with the Atlanta region, with the Goodwill of North Georgia and Max and the Metro Atlanta Chamber, the Equity at Work Initiative, and also the, in partnership as we've been building this out and trying to coordinate with the Atlanta Action for Racial Equity as well. So we are going to walk through a little bit more today around specifically skills-based hiring and why that's critical to support these racial equity and inclusive goals that you have for the region. The way that the Alliance kind of takes shape around this is really looking at what are ways that we can expand access for workers that have less than a 4-year degree that have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, who's largely workers of color. So I'm going to turn it over in just a moment to my colleagues, Jacob and Debbie, to talk us a little bit through some of the work that we've done to date and really understanding what's happening in the labor market, where we can understand where workers' skills are connected to long-term pathways that lead to financial sustainability, and also ways that we can work with the employer community in Atlanta, as well as the other 4 regions where we're doing some deep localized work to really advance those opportunities. Looking at this through a lens of how can we shift around a skills-based approach to recruiting, to hiring, to promoting, and then connecting back to those worker-serving organizations like the Goodwill and the other workforce providers to help to make those connections for workers that have aligned skills that are going to be a good fit for your workforce needs. Let me turn it over then, and we'll take some questions at the end, but I know we have a presentation that we want to be able to share with you with some further detail and background to the analysis that we've done to date and looking at these labor insights and the breadth of work that my Markle colleagues have done in working with employers to help many employers like yourselves shift to a skills-based approach, either for their entire workforce needs or for targeted occupations. But with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Debbie, and we can kind of walk through some of our detail there.
Perfect. And Jacob, are you guiding the slides, or is?
Yeah, can you hear me? Are they up?
They are perfect.
They're showing?
Yes.
Cool.
Great. Good morning. My name is Debbie Hughes. I'm a director with the Markle Foundation, and I'm so pleased and honored to be presenting with my colleague Jacob Vigil and our, as well as our other colleagues across the Markle Foundation and across the Atlanta Fed, Goodwill, and others. We're excited to be presenting on this important and timely topic. Today we'll be providing an quick overview of the Rework America Alliance, our recently published Job Insights report and resources, and highlight some initial learnings of the Skillful Talent series and the importance of skills-based practices in the approach to solve workforce challenges while strengthening and diversifying talent. Our consistent approach goal for these sessions is to create a shared learning environment. And so we really do hope that everybody on this call comes out of the meeting with some tactical takeaways, as well as excitement and enthusiasm for collaborating and working together. Next slide on our agenda. Back up one. So today's presentation, just really quickly, we'll go a little bit into what the challenges is, our approach, insights, and why we use skills-based practices as our vehicle for opening up opportunity for a more diverse workforce, as well as some of the tactical and tangible resources that we've developed as a team that we hope you'll find valuable. Next slide. And so on the next slide, just a quick overview of the Markle Foundation. The Markle Foundation has been working with a broad coalition of partners for the last 8 years on workforce and skill issues. Our focus has been on helping U.S. workers without 4-year degrees, particularly those of color, access career opportunities. Our theory of change is if we can move our economy's labor market to be rooted in skills versus other proxies of one's abilities, such as a degree, more workers will have access to opportunity, regardless of where or how they acquire those skills. Therefore, we've taken an ecosystem approach to building this labor market by partnering with employers, governors, coaches, training providers, worker serving organizations. On the next slide, the Markle Foundation has been engaged in a nationwide initiative called the Rework America Alliance, aimed at driving innovations that expand opportunities for employment and broaden ways for all Americans to learn and train for the work of the future. The Rework America Alliance aims to help millions of workers, regardless of formal education, move into good jobs in the digital economy by accelerating the development of an effective system of worker training aligned to jobs that employers will need to fill. With the compounding economic and health crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, this approach is more important than ever. I think we all feel that the poignant effects of that, and we remain dedicated to enabling unemployed and low-wage workers to move to better jobs in this digital economy by providing a backbone for all types of organizations, supporting workers, especially across the sectors of highest demand. We would love to engage with you all in the chat as we do these presentations. We'll have ample time for Q&A. So we're trying to keep our remarks brief and concise. And so really excited for this dialogue. We have spent the last year developing an initial set of tools, insights, partnerships, and commitments that position the Alliance to accelerate our work and impact in the coming months. As I believe you're all aware, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta is a lead partner, together with, on the next slide, you can see our full list, together with McKinsey, the National Urban League, and many, many other diverse partners, nonprofits, education institutions, worker serving organizations. And one of our lead deployment sites is in North Georgia, together with Goodwill. And so conversations like this help progress how we can engage with employers as well as the broader community. On the next slide. So over the past year, one of the major efforts that we undertook was to around job insights and really understanding how COVID has accelerated the impact of the structural defects in our pre-pandemic economy, and how we define what is a good job, and what are the pathways that real individuals have taken to access good and better jobs along the way. We just released a report 2 weeks ago that put forth the following 4 key insights, and we recommend that you all look and read the report as well as the corresponding tools. But the 4 key takeaways that are really relevant in underpinning all things that we do within the Alliance look at what are the roles that based on experience-based job sectors that allow access to more opportunities. What does this mean? It means that we defined what are origin, gateway, and target roles. That's the definitions, and we'll go into that in the next slide. You can keep this one on for a second, Jacob. We identified 77 gateway occupations that have the highest likelihood of success for an individual transitioning, and that's based on millions of workers who have successfully made those transitions. And we look at what's the likelihood of success of somebody taking having access to a gateway role and then allowing them to make upward mobility progress. We've done a lot of analysis on what defines a quote unquote good job. What's the role of training in allowing somebody to make those job progression movements? And how do you assist in providing a broader spectrum of options for an individual worker that allows them to understand the skills that they've had from experiences previously, to allow them to then apply that to jobs that will open up opportunity and pay them a living wage. And our work moving forward really takes the approach that if you identify and are able to pull out the skills that an individual worker has and apply them to the roles that are in high demand need, looking at how do you then invest in highly effective training, you can offer your workers and your employees opportunities to access roles that will allow them to continue to move up and have mobility and make a living wage. So these are our 4 key insights from the report. On the next slide, we give a quick definition, as I just mentioned, into how we define these different types of roles, origin roles, gateway roles, and target roles. We do not think any job is a bad job, but we do take the lens that a worker and employers should understand the spectrum and how the different components are from origin to gateway to target are intersecting, and through our analysis we've been really able to see somebody who is who's been in target roles, who did not have a 4-year degree, how were they able to access those roles, and what were the successful pathways from real individuals and real workers to allow them to get there. On the next slide, I want to just point out that the true focus of all of the work that we've been doing has been in looking at how do we support workers who are unemployed and workers who don't have a 4-year degree, for which the majority are workers of color. And so a main focus of our work has been in how to improve the racial representation in these gateway and target roles. And so we believe that the approach we're taking is one that will allow access to opportunity based on skills for workers of color. And just some poignant facts: that the unemployment rate for Black workers persists at almost 10%, which is 4% more than the rate of white workers. And these challenges disproportionately affect women, with almost 1.9 million less women in the labor force in spring of 2021 compared to February 2020. And I just throw out some stats because these numbers are really poignant and probably not telling anybody anything new, but it just keeps us focused that the workers we're trying to serve are communities of color, and that we believe that these skills-based approaches are a mechanism to help support communities of color having access to better jobs. On the next slide, I call this the spaghetti slide. This is the kind of the underpinnings approach of how gateway roles connect into target roles. And with gateway occupations, we have identified and we'll be able to tell people, here is a job that's going to grow in the marketplace. So if you've been a retail worker or if you've been a hotel worker, that these are the skills that you have from that job and can carry on to the next one. So the takeaway from this is that we've done quite a bit of analysis, and that we're able to parse out what are the high demand skills and how do they relate to your next job progression. And many of these are identified in gateways, might be targets in themselves, but they would still allow for a career progression to even better roles and occupations. And so the world is messy, it's not clean, but if you're able to parse out skills and the applicability of skills into these new roles, it allows for a lot clearer recognition to someone's mobility. This is just a nice transition to my colleague Jacob, which is that as we think about the 3 core challenges in our labor market, with the struggle to fill positions, increasing economic change, and rising inequities, the Rework America Alliance really isn't just about building the insights, but is about producing the actionable tools that will enable communities to be able to engage with their workers and their employers, to hopefully be able to understand what is your high demand skills, what are your open positions, where do you have needs, and then be able to work with you around skills-based practices, being able to transform and take those steps to a skills-based approach, and then tie that to what those roles and connectivity to our worker serving organizations and our community partners. And so really the takeaway as I transition to my colleague is that all the things that we've been doing over the last year are to provide a framing, but then an actionable set of open and freely available resources that we hope that you will find valuable. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jacob Vigil, to sort of dive into what are these skills-based practices that we're talking about, and how can you utilize them in your work.
Thanks, Debbie. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Perfect. So thanks for having us here today. I appreciate it. I'm going to focus really on the skills-based portion of this and why it matters, and maybe a couple case studies on the impact it can have on organizations and just why it matters. So A skills-based strategy really focuses on specific skills directly related to each role and how that is embedded throughout the entire life cycle. So today we're going to dive specifically into job postings amongst that skills-based life cycle. And we start with the job posting specifically because it sets the foundation for the rest of the hiring and promotion process. So for example, once you've built a skills-based job posting that clearly articulates the required and preferred skills, your interview questions can then be built based directly on those same required and preferred competencies in the job posting. Assessments, internal pathways, upskilling, promotion, they can all then be designed around competencies needed for each role. So on this slide, we show a couple case studies. One in particular was Swisslog. We worked with Swisslog in Colorado, and they changed one thing, and realistically, it was their interview process and questions. And as a result, they doubled ethnic diversity over a 2-year period and had a 65% reduction in turnover. In Colorado, we worked with the Department of Healthcare Policy, and they reduced their time to hire from an average of 5 months to within a few weeks by updating just their job postings. So you can see there's a huge, there's a big impact on making skills-based practice changes. And whether you make the full scale skills-based practice changes or simply 1 or 2 changes, you'll still have an impact on your organization. And that's why it matters to so many companies. This works for both large, small, medium-sized companies as well. So before we dive into skills-based job postings, we need to take a step back and understand as a whole what our inclusive skills-based practice is. It means focusing on specific skills needed to succeed in a job throughout an employee's entire life cycle. So that means rather than relying on education, credentials, past experience, it recognizes one's knowledge and abilities regardless of where they were acquired. Again, our focus is to help employers move from intent to action and implement a full skills-based strategy. So throughout, we'll show you tools. I'll kick it back over to Debbie at the end to show you some tools and resources to help you actually implement the things we're discussing today. So what is skills-based hiring? Remove credentials whenever possible is one of the biggest things and easiest things you can do. Most jobs use credentials such as work experience and degrees as a main qualification, which informs the screening process. So when credentials are removed from job postings, the screening process should draw from the required competencies. For jobs that truly require credentials, screening should use both the credentials and required competencies for a job posting. And that's a big one, right? And the key word there is when possible. Remove credentials when possible. We understand in healthcare, you want a doctor to actually have their certification and their license, right? And we want them to have practice for years before they're working on it. So when you can remove that credential is the key word. Define the right competencies for the job. You want to make sure that each job has its own particular competencies. There's plenty of times I've worked personally with employers where I've seen the same exact competencies for multiple jobs, right? And completely different jobs. So really focus in on what are the competencies very specific to this job that I'm looking to hire for. And then the third pillar to essentially the skills-based hiring process is reducing bias. The goal of this process is to ensure the person being hired can demonstrate the competencies required for the job. Methods to reduce bias will be integrated in all of the stages of the talent selection process. That's a huge component of skills-based a skills-based hiring process. So now that we understand what a skills-based strategy is and what skills-based hiring is, we can now look more specifically at what a skills-based job posting is, right? A pedigree posting, what we define as pedigree posting is, think of your traditional posting that you see. You might go to Indeed and see there's a lot of credential requirements. There might be 30 different required competencies, or they might not even define it as competency, right? What are the requirements for the role? So those types of job postings use credentials. One thing we have to also keep in mind is that credentials aren't simply 4-year degrees. But it also includes work experience and industry experience, such as requiring someone to have 4 years related experience, right? We get this a lot where we see job postings that say related experience, and we really don't understand what that means. So as a result of using credentials as proxies for skills, we have what we call degree inflation. And essentially degree inflation is a practice of requiring a degree for jobs that don't require college level education, which only exacerbates the inequities in our talent life cycle. Just to give an example, 78% of African Americans and 85% of Latinos do not have a college degree. This is due obviously to socioeconomic and financial barriers in our higher education system. But by removing the use of a bachelor's degree as a hiring requirement, we can actually improve equity in our hiring and result in more diverse candidates and hiring decisions that create more equity amongst our companies. So to help minimize barriers and bias rather than relying on education, credentials, past experience, and other proxies for ability, a skills-based job posting recognizes that there are many ways to acquire knowledge and abilities, and uses language, inclusive language specifically, that focuses on screening in candidates rather than screening out candidates. And that's the goal. I think that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen with a skills-based approach is you start to screen candidates in versus screening them out. So let's take a look at an example of a pedigree versus a skills-based job posting. So there's a sample of a recruiter job posting, something, most companies have recruiters or some type of talent acquisition that helps to post jobs or create a job posting. This probably looks very familiar to a lot of you. But if our goal is to increase diversity and create more equitable opportunities, what are some of the things in here that would prevent us from reaching that goal? If you all have access to throw it in the chat, I'll give us a minute to look it over, add comments, thoughts, and just throw them in the chat. As you all are doing that, I did want to call out a couple things in here. For example, we should think about the bullet that asks for experience with Workday and how it can be more broadened, right? Candidates will self-select out, even if they have a lot of ATS experience, but don't have Workday specific ATS experience. There's a lot of data out there that shows when they don't have the exact experience, they tend to opt out. So recognize that when you put specific programs, people will opt out. So maybe think about how can we broaden that, right? Maybe we can say something like, have ATS experience rather than Workday. Studies have proven in the IT field in coding, if you've learned one language in coding, you can easily learn another language. So a lot of IT companies have adapted to that and saying that we don't need you to have Ruby on Rails, even though that's what we use. If you have Python or something else, then we can utilize that and you can gain the knowledge and skills you need to utilize our coding on the job. So just keep that in mind. Now we'll kick over to skills-based job posting. Here we see a sample of a skills-based posting next to the pedigree posting. What is different about this job posting compared to the pedigree job posting? What stands out to you? I'll give you all 30 seconds to look over the skills-based job posting and see the difference. Skills-based job postings connect required skills to the role and enables a broader set of applicants to see themselves in the position. Some things to consider here. Notice that we replaced the bachelor's degree with very specific competencies directly related to the role. Another thing to consider, do we actually need 1-year recruitment experience for a role? Or can we add specific skills that may have been learned in a previous role or industry? When you crosswalk and cross map skills that you gain in a customer service role, a lot of those are very similar to a recruiter role. So you have to take a step back and think, do I actually need X amount of years experience for this position? Or can I use, someone that came from a different industry? Can they qualify and be really good at this job and excel at this job? So let's think about all the people who have the skills listed in the skills-based example. Most of those people have acquired those skills in different roles and industries. Now imagine how many of these candidates we're cutting out by adding in the requirement of that 1-year specific experience, right? you're actually eliminating over 75% of your candidate pool. And amongst that 75%, you've eliminated up to 90% of your diverse candidate pool, of your Black, Browns, Asians, immigrants. You're eliminating almost 90% of that candidate pool, and potentially more, depending on the geographic area and population and makeup. Right? In Atlanta, I'm not sure with the demographics, but I can make a good assumption that there's less Latinos there. In the Southwest where I'm at, there's a lot of Latinos. So, you in your geographic area, you're going to eliminate even more percentage of people of color. So why do you think skills-based postings may be more effective? And I'll let you, just ponder on that. We won't take too much time on that, but just think about it. Why would a skills-based job posting be more effective than a traditional job posting? So many of you are wondering, this is great, but how do I actually get started on this? And that leads into the next piece of our actionable next steps. So very easy thing you can do. Marco has created, as part of our Rework America Alliance, what we call the Skillful Talent Series. It's a 4-part workshop specifically geared toward employers, HR, talent acquisition, and hiring managers, right? It goes through essentially the entire talent life cycle. So it starts with what we did today, and I gave a very brief overview of what skills-based practices are, right? And what a skills-based job posting could look like. But the foundation is that skills-based job posting. So the first module we have for the Skillful Talent Series is how do you attract the right talent, and focuses heavily on that job posting. The second module is how do you create a skills-based interview process, from writing skills-based interview questions to rubrics on how to approach it, to actually scoring the interview process. Then we move into selection and onboarding. How do you properly select? How do you take the interview process, the scores they got there? How do you take an assessment that you may have had a candidate do either pre-interview or post-interview? How do you take all those, put them together and say, okay, who is our best candidate? And look at it from a lens of not who was my favorite candidate, but who actually brought the skills required for this job. And then we move into the onboarding piece as well. Okay, we know this candidate that we selected had these required skills. There are other skills that weren't required for the job, but we know they'll need them to excel at this job. And they didn't quite have the competency level that we are looking for. So how do we provide that support to those employees? And you do that through a lens of, let's tack on this training at the front end of the process rather than the back end, or as we've all seen before, give them a pile of HR paperwork at the beginning, the first day, introduce them to some people and say, good luck, right? We've seen that happen all the time. I've been through it. Many others have. So how do we really focus that onboarding process? And there's data that shows people who leave within the first 90 days, the majority of them leave because of lack of a proper onboarding process, right? They don't feel like they know what their job is. They don't feel integrated. So keep that in mind. And then to bring it full scale with the Skillful Talent Series, we have retention and onboarding, retention and advancement, so how do you retain and advance your employees that you currently have, right? A lot of employers throughout COVID looked at it as, how do I redeploy skills that people have in my company? I don't want to lay everybody off, but I don't need this department for whatever reason, but I do need people for this department. So instead of looking externally, how do I look internally? Right? How do I assess what skills people currently have and what they need to move into a different position in the company? And this provides redeployment of skills for the company. It provides upward mobility and longevity for employees. And it shows the employees as well, like, hey, I can actually move from HR into an IT analyst role because I have 3 out of the 4 skills they need. So how does an employer or supervisor or hiring manager look and say, how do I support that? Okay, I know you're lacking this one skill. Let's seek the training for it so we can give you the skill and then you're ready to go into that next role, whether it may be a lateral move or it might be moving straight up the ladder, right, into that next hiring manager role. So that brings the full Skillful Talent Series together. It's a 4-part series. It is SHRM and HRCI certified. We present that virtually and in person. And by we, I mean we will also work with the intermediary partners, such as Goodwill in the Atlanta area. So virtually or in person. And we've also digitized the first 2 modules of the Skillful Talent series. Those are online self-guided series. And at the end, we'll throw a link in so you all can grab that link, and we'll send over a code so you all can access it if you would like. And it's free, it's self-guided, it goes over the first 2 modules, and we're continuing to build out the remainder of the modules that you all will have access to, hopefully over the next 6 months for the full Skillful Talent series. The next things you can do is consider dedicating staff resources to attend our Skillful Talent Academy. Now, what that is essentially, think of it as a train the trainer. We've had employers, for example, their L&D and HR department become subject matter experts on skills-based practices. This creates a way for them to deploy across the organization or the company, right? It scales it. Instead of trying to send 500 people to a Markle or to a Goodwill presentation on skills-based practices, you send 3 HR or 3 people from L&D who can become skills-based experts on it. They go back and begin training the rest of the organization. So, and then someone in-house is actually an expert. On the other side of it, I know we do have partners in the room who may not be employers, who may be worker serving organizations or work directly with the employers that are on. They also become trainers as well, so that they can host trainings, they can consult with employers in their local area. So that's an easy step you can take as well. And then the third thing is actively collaborate with your leading state players to champion skills-based practices. Goodwill is currently a huge champion of skills-based practices, obviously. But look at what the governor's doing. In Colorado, the governor has actually built it into their goals and saying, we want to increase skills-based practice use amongst employers by 10% over the next year. And then look at your local SHRM chapters, local one-stops, workforce centers, and key regional groups. A lot of them are already looking into and providing resources for these things. And connect with them. If you don't have the bandwidth to maybe champion it in-house, look at other partners, look at those partners that I mentioned, and figure out ways, how can we actually deploy this across our community? So with that being said, I'm going to kick it back to Debbie to go over a few tools and resources to help you all get started with making those inclusive skills-based practice changes.
So thank you, Jacob, and that was so great. And I was going through the questions in the chat, and so I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. Our job insights analysis and tools that you're seeing here could be its own session, and we're happy to dive deeper into it. Just really quickly, we released this job insights report that put out some definitions of what are these good gateway jobs, what are the historical adjacencies that have allowed workers to make those job progressions, what are the audiences and workers who are likely to be most affected by this type of approach, which are workers of color. So dive into the report, and we're absolutely happy to go deeper into it. Our colleagues at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta took the lead on behalf of the Alliance in building out the manipulatable tool that links to this report, and it's called the Job Insights Monitor, or the Rework America Insights Monitor. I recommend you go to that website because you can put in your geographic metro, you can see the insights in real time and manipulate them based on what are the different job categories, what are the trainings, all of those kinds of really key assets and insights. And then we've really importantly built out a set of curriculum and a worker-facing tool that called the Job Progressions Tool. This was done in lead with our colleagues with McKinsey on behalf of the Alliance. And it is a fabulous tool that gets delivered through a coach or career navigator that allows a worker to understand the skills they have and apply them to the opportunities, gateway roles, and the the spectrum of opportunities, and then links a worker to a skills-based resume tool, development tool, and local job postings. So, and we've built a coach and career navigation curriculum that can be deployed to allow individuals to then engage with workers. Next slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. That's just a brief look at the job progressions tool. Next slide. And then just to Jacob's point, and we just presented a 4-part series to the Business Roundtable, and actually just presented to about 150 of our largest companies, 80 of which were part of this Multiple Pathways initiative, but they came and were sat into 4-part series connected to that Skillful Talent series that we just talked about. And I just want to pause and say, we're going to give you a set of access codes that allow you to go into our training platform for you to at least see it, navigate it, see if it is meaningful to you, pass it on to your head of talent or the individuals who are thinking about this in your organizations and communities. But the real hope is that it's not that we are the only folks who have tools. We are a nonprofit. This is free and openly available. It's that we hope we have provided you with resources that allow you to take the first steps, both in skills-based practices, as well as, in this case, really skills-based practices connected to your in-demand roles, and then connected to our community partners, as we're all part of this Rework America Alliance pilot in North Georgia. But we have resources. We are here at Markle and Rework America Alliance, and through these efforts to support you. And so don't ever hesitate in asking for additional information or connections. Next slide. So let's end on the access code. I just wanted to point it out, just because we had just done this with a number of large employers, and it's not the link right there on the training.skillful.com. Well, we can make this available for you. I think you see lots of these presentations, and the one thing that I hope differentiates this group from others is that we're not about commitments. We're about sort of helping to enable you to feel like this skills-based topic is something that is attainable, and that's something that you can turn to us as resources to help make those first steps. With that, I will stop and hope that we have some time for questions.
First, I want to say thank you all for this great presentation. It was a lot of really good information that's really going to be helpful for us as we continue to kind of readjust to opening up the labor market and getting involved in helping our job seekers, find employment and training to help get us to some of these progressions that you all talked about. I think in theory, we all really kind of applaud and understand the progressions that you all are talking about, from the origin job to the gateway jobs. Really the tools that you all are providing, I think, are going to help us get there. There's a lot of work between, where we are now and getting there. So we want to open it up to the questions to the audience. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand, or we'll call on you and unmute you. We do have a few questions that we'll ask of the folks that are on the call from us. We'll start with this one question. Well, before I get to Darlene's question, I want to ask, you've had a lot of conversations with employers. How are they receiving or responding to this information? Do you feel like they are, going to address the issues that they have within their companies through your recommendations? Have you got pushback? Can you talk about how employers are receiving this information and are utilizing the tools?
So I'll start, and then my colleagues, please feel free to jump in. I think that every employer that I've had a conversation with is thinking about this, are truly committed to trying to open up their opportunities for a more diverse workforce, and I believe that have true commitment. I think that many of the companies that we engage with are at very different stages of implementation and action. And so whether it's kind of committing to do different, like a more skills-based practices, or look at the way that they have their job descriptions written, or their interview practices, or evaluate where they may have unconscious bias or things like that. There's a commitment to want. I think where we feel like we can have, and so there's a real openness and warmth to in the reception. I think there is a need for support and intentional partnerships. And so community forums like this, forums like the Business Roundtable and 110 and others, where there's actual tools and resources and peer-to-peer engagement, where companies can kind of grapple together on how to take these actions, I think is where you see the most progress and where those commitments become sort of actionable.
Is there, or what is the role that providers, workforce boards, providers can play, kind of helping to move this a little bit further along?
Jacob, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So every organization's role will look different. It depends on bandwidth, capacity, things like that. For instance, in Colorado, we have a local workforce center in Denver who is what we call a champion or a convener, right? They actually facilitate workshops I want to say every 2 months. Now that the pandemic happened, they were actually doing it once a month for their local employers, right? They have a business development team who does it. They bring their employers, they schedule it, and they give them the training. And post training, they give them the one-on-one consulting, right? We showed you how to build this skills-based job posting. Now, if you're still stuck on or confused, or you might be a little worried or hesitant that I'm not sure I got it right, they can sit down and work with them one-on-one to create those skills-based job postings, right? And create the interview questions and so on. The other role people play is championing, right? We have another workforce center who doesn't host workshops, but they champion it, right? They put it into everything that they're marketing, saying you should be doing skills-based practices. They talk to them and they send them to the people who do the workshops, right? We have a local chamber that hosts the workshops and works directly with employers to help them implement. They come up with strategy. They come up with what are your pain points? Where do we need to actually focus first in this process, and come up with an actual strategy, right? So it looks different for every organization. What I will say, the role everyone in a local community should play is coming together. That's what we've seen work best, is a workforce center coming together, a local chamber coming together, a SHRM chapter, an economic developer, your local nonprofits, right? In Denver, we have Mi Casa, they all come together and say, let's make an ecosystems change to these practices. And then what happens is it scales a lot faster, right? Employers start hearing it from multiple entities. So they might not trust one organization, but they trust another. And when they hear it from multiple, they start getting bought in a lot quicker to saying, we need to make these changes now. We see other employers doing it. We're going to be behind, right? And then you see these employers, and we use examples in Colorado and Indiana and Rhode Island all the time, where early adopters of it are starting to now fill positions faster. Their diversity changes amongst the team that they've made these changes to, right? And then these local workforce and economic developers start to use those case studies, right? To show, look, this is working. Here's how you go about doing it. And it just scales it, right? And it creates a sustainable model because multiple organizations are utilizing it.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is just that the workforce boards and our worker serving organizations and all of our community partners, this is about not just context setting, but this is about understanding what your local labor market needs really are, and providing this sort of convening and central voice for your community, right? So we did national analysis and we regionalized it, and so we do the best we can by what I kind of call faceless labor market analysis, right? So we can do the best we can, but until we hand it off to you to then have conversations with employers to say, is this really what you're facing? Is this really your sort of common pain points? Is this really where we think we can connect workers to greater opportunity? It doesn't become real. And I think that's where your workforce boards, your community partners have sort of the central conducting role in this, is actually sort of contextualizing it and making it relevant for your community.
Yeah.
So we've seen a rise in a lot of conversations and strategies around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last year. And I'm wondering if that's been a bigger driver to these conversations, or is it really the labor market and turnover, the shortages, the turnover, et cetera? Kind of what's more driving employers to really want to adopt some of these practices? As providers or trainers, should we approach it from the DEI perspective or really from the kind of the business perspective to make that argument?
I think it's a both and. I mean, if you look at the labor market stats and you look at who's traditionally in an origin role that doesn't pay a living wage and doesn't allow for you to have progression, it tends to be an individual who doesn't have an individual of color and somebody who doesn't have a 4-year degree. And so it becomes very poignant that the opportunities that we're trying to facilitate is by opening up access to these skills-based progressions that allow somebody's experience to carry the day, allows an individual who is the majority of whom are individuals of color. And so it is extremely central to our work, because the folks we are trying to support are the vast majority of the population within who we would like to help access additional jobs that'll lead them to a living wage. From the employer perspective, I think there is some piece that there's a push to opening up diversity, equity, and opportunity. But I think we've made a really strong case that there's a business case to be made, that if you open up your application pools and you allow more diverse applicants in, that you will actually have lower turnover, higher retention, individuals who are committed to the jobs, and that they actually have really strong business value cases. So I think there's an and to it, and that businesses have come along on the journey. I believe in the fact that they're aiming to commit to do this. I know that we have stayed very core to the center of this, because the workers the vast majority of who we're talking about is our communities of workers of color. And if we don't help provide additional opportunities for workers to progress in this space, for us, it would be completely missing the boat.
Yeah, I agree. It all depends on what their need is at the time, right? Large companies needed to fill positions. They were looking at, how do I fill positions, right? Small companies right now, we have restaurants, we have hotels that are looking to hire. I can't speak for the whole nation, but it seems it is a trend across the nation where, you have restaurant workers, you have entry-level workers at hospitality companies and hotels that are going to be very diverse. So they're looking at, I need to hire back 100 people, right? They're not focused on the diversity. When we approach them with skills-based practices, they start thinking about things like, well, we have a very diverse entry-level candidate pool. It tends to get wider and wider and more male as you move to the top, right? So now we have another issue we have to think about, and this encompasses all of that. That's the beauty of skills-based practices. It doesn't just work to hire someone, right? It works to actually move them within the company and show progressions. How do I create a career path for someone at my hotel? Because I know they can move. We've seen people, right? We hear it all the time from job seekers. 10 years down the road, a GM or someone who's pretty high level is one of those unicorns that said, I started off as a bell person or a bell boy or bell girl, and I moved up with this one company. We want to see more of that. And they don't necessarily have to hit the GM, level, but we want to see more people of color in those supervisor manager roles, right? and being able to move up. So it encompasses all of that. And they might not come to us with the DEI perspective, but when they start going through this process, they realize that, oh, we can create changes in other areas that help us with other DEI pieces of our organization.
Great, thank you. I want to make sure we get to Darlene's question. She was asking specifically about leadership in Atlanta, kind of who's taking on the roles that you all are talking about in Atlanta, who are you working with locally, and what can we see coming in the next couple of weeks or a few months in terms of the work that you're doing in Atlanta?
I can take that, and then Joy, you can jump in and provide any additional detail. But we're working largely through a handful of organizations, MAX, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and the Goodwill of North Georgia. So we're working with that larger consortium to be able to kind of catalyze all of this work. So the work exists in a handful of workflows. There's these labor insights, which we will have some localized detail that we'll go through with that, kind of a triumvirate to understand what these labor market insights are telling us, how they can use that for agenda setting and for work that's kind of trickling down to worker serving activities. We also have a number of different tools and resources to advance and elevate the job coaching function as it exists through all of the providers on the ground and through this larger network. And we know that job coach is kind of a catch-all term for any person that's working directly with the job seeker. So it's similar principles to what Jacob and Debbie went through today. How can we work with our job seekers to help them understand the skills that they have, to elevate those skills, to promote those skills, and create a better inroad into job opportunities, leading with skills and not necessarily with pedigree. Also on the training side, we want to be able to understand where are these best bets in terms of gateway jobs that are relevant and actually in demand and validated by employers in the Atlanta region, so that we're ensuring that the education and training system we're aligned to is meeting those needs in terms of any skill gap that need to be addressed. On the employer side, this is where we'd love to advance the conversations that we're talking about today, really underpin that with the equity at work, with the Atlanta racial equity initiative that you have going on, because we see this as being really a tool that helps to advance those objectives as well, where we have very discrete and kind of tactical steps that you can take to change the way that the employers are hiring, change the way that they're working directly with the worker serving entities, whether that's through Goodwill or any of the other partners that are supported through the workforce system or that are serving job seekers in the area. So we're at the point now where we're beginning to kind of lay out what this plan is in Atlanta in particular. We've just recently, over the past week and a half, gone through some very deep kind of discovery sessions and focus groups so that we can understand where the work is right now, where the big needs are, so that we can customize the way that we're engaging with people on the ground. We want to recognize that you all have day jobs. This is all in service of that, right? But that we don't want to overwhelm. We know that there are bandwidth constraints. So we want to be very practical and tailored in terms of how we engage kind of day to day with the efforts on the ground. So more to come on that front. I think the first piece of that will be starting with kind of labor market details, so we know where we're narrowing in service of specific jobs, in service of specific employer needs, and how we can elevate aspects of your talent pool that are best aligned to that. But we're looking forward to this engagement over the next 12 months and really working from the hip, pulling in expertise and technical assistance where it's needed and where it comes up, but also through those main kind of workflows that I just laid out.
Thank you so much. We've had some really good conversation. There's a lot of great information in the chat, so hopefully you all have had a chance to look through that. We will send out the slides to everyone that registered today, as well as the resources that were provided and the access code, so that everyone does continue to have access to the information that was provided today. I want to thank all the speakers that are here today. I have some Max housekeeping business. Just wanted to say, if you have not joined Max, please consider joining Max. We encourage you all to get involved with Max to continue to follow up on the work of Rework Alliance, America Alliance, but also just in general. There's a lot of great resources that are provided through Max. So we encourage you all, if you have not joined, to become a member as well. We have some great programming coming up in the next few weeks. So please check out our website for more information. Again, just want to thank all the folks today that are here from Markle, from the Urban League, from McKinsey, from the Federal Reserve Bank. Thank you all for such great information, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all. And thank you all for attending today, and look forward to continuing the conversation, and have a great weekend. Thank you.